Hey, I actually streamed this the other day, but in consolidating a lot of my video configurations, failed to check the record as VODs box on Twitch. So we're recording this for posterity's sake. Um, the topic today is just a particular pattern or combination of technologies that I've used in a variety of projects historically and found to be very useful. So this is not necessarily, you could call it a stack if you want. I'm a little reluctant to, so I've been web programming for a while, for example, and it seems like everybody already has the new idea of like, what's going to replace LAMP? LAMP is dead. LAMP is a great stack. And one of the reasons it's great is that each combination of technologies contributes a very specific role, and when you put those pieces together, you get a very comprehensive set of tools that are reusable across many different problem sets. So instead of trying to like design a stack or even trying to replace something, this is just a interesting combination of things that I've found to be very useful. They complement each other very well. So the goal here is primarily to put together combination or a template of technologies that lets you rapidly build and deploy self-contained web applications. So by the word self or term self-contained, you can probably guess this is containerized. This is not a sophisticated orchestration. This is a single container, but it does give you front-end, back-end, ways to integrate the two that are fairly straightforward, very quick to put together, and ways to extend both with a very interesting combination of technologies. And basically, once you have this starter kit, if you will, there's a lot of different directions you can go, and we'll take a look at exactly what those are. So, for lack of a better term, LAMP, of course, is both an acronym and something you can easily say. The acronym in this case, I went with DFGV. You can't say that. That's just like DFGV, right? But if you're typing it, DFGV right next to each other with your left hand. So it's easier to type than it is to say. Since I did mention that this is containerized, you can probably guess the first thing we're putting together is a Docker file. So let's say from Python 3.11, let me make sure Docker's actually running because this didn't work last time. Oh, wow, it's not. Interesting. Okay. I guess that means we'll largely just put together these examples. Most of them run outside of the Docker container. That's primarily means to pack them together. But the F and the G in that acronym I mentioned, if the D stands for Docker, stands for Flask and G event. So we'll use those for specific purposes, and we'll walk through why. But you can probably guess that the backend in that case is going to be Python. So we're importing a basic Python image here, and that's all we're going to do with the Docker file for now. Let's put together the basic server. OS tools are as useful. We'll just start with Flask for now. This is a very useful habit for not just Flask applications where you need resource references and all that, but this set of module level globals is actually very useful. Let me walk through what we're doing here. I don't like hacking the Python path on the fly, although that's not uncommon. It is, however, useful to know exactly where you're running from the context of the specific package path, especially so you can have consistent relative resource names, ignoring relative imports, just the resources important for hosting static calls and things like that. We also, useful to know the name just for reference and debugging, and then since Flask requires some sort of a name to generate the WSGI application, that's a key point, by the way. Flask applications are WSGI applications out of the box, and we'll see how useful that is. We generate our global application symbol as a Flask object right off the bat. So let's add a route here. This is one of the great things about Flask is you set up the application and you start mounting endpoints right away. I find it's very useful to declare specifically what methods you're treating with each endpoint. Later on when you go back, you know exactly what this is doing. Hard to underrate how useful that is. It's text slash point, isn't it? Okay, so out of the box here, we have a basic endpoint in Flask. It's just returning bytes with a 200 code and specific headers, in this case, content type text plain. You don't have to do all of those things, but for the same reason that we include methods, when you're going back and you're looking at your server file, it's incredibly useful to know what methods are being handled, what the return codes are, the status codes are, what the headers are, just at a glance, right, for each endpoint. So you get a very intuitive idea as the engineer, like exactly what interface is being exposed by that server. So that's actually enough for now to get us started with Flask. But if you've ever put a Flask application together, you probably know that there's a development server built into Flask, and you can use it, but it will give you all sorts of warnings about this isn't production grade. Yeah, and it's true. So what is production grade then, right? There are a variety of options out there, MicroWSGI, GNaccord, etc. I find one of the most useful approaches is to combine Flask and gEvent. gEvent comes with a WSGI server out of the box, so it's production grade, and more importantly, maybe even it has very good support for asynchronous scaling, and it is very good at hooking in a variety of other handlers, and it's platform neutral. So you can do this in Windows, you can do this in Linux, etc., and we'll see exactly what some of those handlers are later. Of course, it's compatible with WSGI out of the box. So let's add from gEvent, import the Python WSGI server, and then just so we can hook in configurations from the container runtime, we'll make sure that these are all coming from environmental variables. That's another good habit to get into server port. Those will all be strings, so let's handle the default values as if they were strings. And then, now we can, when we call this function, say that calling it from the command line will host it. And after a quick little status message, so give it the name, where we're hosting it, port, we will say serve where. Then our usual so that is actually enough to get us started out of the box, but we will, at some point, I'd recommend you use at least in semantic versions. Minor version constraints here for consistency's sake. We'll leave those alone for now. Actually, let's not. There we go. Boom, boom, ba boom, 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 ba boom, boom. 23.9. All right. So now, if we wanted to, boom, boom, boom. Right. So what we're really after here, though, is just showing you the actual functionality. So let's bonk. No big surprises here. 48,000. Well, okay, we're good to go. So now let's talk about front end, with that having been so wonderfully polished. I find it's incredibly useful to be able to build applications that are self-contained static files, but I strongly prefer to avoid sophisticated build and pack steps in JavaScript for front end. your mileage may vary, of course. There are many wonderful tools out there. I try to avoid buying into abstractions that I don't need, but that's a whole other conversation presentation. So with that having been said, if I am going to build and pack, my preference is Vite because of how well it works with vanilla, how easily you can plug in other modules, how nicely compatible it is with ES6, etc. So let's create some static files here. Nope. Helps if I make it. Using vanilla template, yarn version 1 for life. All right. So this, of course, gives us our start application here. We can say build it and pack it, build it, pack it. So now we have some static files under dist, and we need to host them. We need to serve them. So this is our front-end application, right? So let's add support for static files. There is a path specifier, conveniently enough, in Flask that you can use for the routes. This is routing static file request. And then Flask has a nice little send from directory shortcut. And we have our relative path references from the module variables. Hooray. One other thing here we'll want to do, of course, root endpoint should default to the index. Burp. So let's replace this with okay, and that, believe it or not, is enough. Assuming I didn't make any mistakes. Hey, I didn't make any mistakes. How wonderful and rare is that? So, what we should see now is default Vite template. While you're developing, of course, you can instead, for front end, do something like this. And now you have hot module replacement for the same application. So just to give you an example, I'm going to call this DFGV. Yay, right, no refresh, no rebuild. So packing is really more of a sort of CI operation. We'll talk about that in a little bit more. But it's nice with Vite to know there's a significant degree of consistency between the development runtime and what is ultimately the static files that are going to be hosted within the container. So those are all wonderful things. And again, that gives us enough to start adding any other sort of utilities in the JavaScript front end, any other hooks and either UI elements or models or frameworks, etc. So if we want to put all this together, we have some degree of a front end, some degree of a back end. Keep in mind, if we want procedural hooks, it's all here in the Flask application. But now we actually need to worry about the Docker file. So as this is being built, we need a working directory. We need to copy in the contents. Of course, if you don't want all of that source, you can add it to a Docker ignore or something like that. We want to install the requirements, and then when the container actually starts running, it's going to run that Python file. So let me see if Docker ever spun up here. It didn't. Wonderful. Thank you, Windows. I will instead sort of walk you through the ultimate result here. So within the Docker container, we combined a number of things. And there's a variety of directions you could go. G-Event as the front end is hosting a Flask application, but there are a number of things that go into that, right? So the front end is packed with Vite, into a set of static files. Flask is configured to host. But because it's a WSGI application, we can also hook in any other procedural endpoints or routes that we want. So this is how you would scale, like in LAMP, like the M is for MySQL, right? So this is how you would scale to hook in any other databases that you want natively within Python itself using the Python packages. If you want to hook into Redis cache, pass in the configuration of environmental variables. It's very straightforward, one-step, two-step in this approach to do so without sort of needing to rewrite too much. And that's how you'd start hooking in state, right? Redis or Postgres or SQLite or whatever you want. Most of those things have just outstanding and very straightforward support within Python to hook in. The other comment here, I showed sort of two approaches to the front end piece. You can run it in development mode, of course, to actually get the hot module replacement as you're coding front end in real time. Ultimately, the pack operation is probably not going to be something you're doing at your development station, even if you're full stack. That's probably going to be part of some CI. So instead of trying to build all of this at once, that's one of the reasons we didn't include the pack here in the Docker file. There's a couple other ways that you could hook that in. You could do the Vite build as part of a CI. You could add it here so it's only at part of the Docker build, etc. There's a couple approaches, but we wouldn't really want to be doing that every single time we make a change. So some sort of Docker ignore would be useful. Just make sure you're not copying everything in. But the last thing I really want to talk about here with this pattern is G-event. So I mentioned there's a few other options. Why is G-event particularly useful in these cases? I'd say really there's two reasons at the end of the day. The first is, this is mostly REST so far, but in a wide variety of circumstances, I find it useful to be able to add WebSocket support to the front end to support streaming message traffic, any other hooks into feeds on the back end. Very easy to do, by the way. If you need RabbitMQ or ZooMQ or anything else in the back end with good Python support, you'd translate that into bidirectional translation for WebSocket to the front end. You don't have to worry about any sort of particularly fancy hacking in the JavaScript. It's just another endpoint that's being exposed for WebSocket subscription. The WebSocket support in G-event is fantastic. It's very straightforward to add. It's very straightforward to test. It's fairly foolproof, and it is very asynchronous friendly. Because of the way the G-event is structured, I think it's on Greenlit already. It can actually go in and monkey patch the core modules, which is sort of the second point, which is G-event is nicely performant, and until we stop having to worry about the GIL, it's a very nice way to make sure that your Python server, Python not being the most performant language ever, is relatively production ready and can handle a large variety of connections and scales well asynchronously. There are also a few nice tricks you can do, whether it's WebSockets or anything else, maintaining like a module scope pool of WebSocket connections that each connection can set up broadcasts to, so you can relay messages. That's how it'd be a very straightforward step, by the way, to go from here to your traditional chat application as WebSocket proof of concept or demonstration. Those are the major pieces that go into it, though, and hopefully you can see how easy it would be to step in any direction to add any variety of technologies from here. That is about it. I don't know why I included chat here. I guess it's just part of the default screen layout because I'm recording this anyways, but hopefully that's interesting and useful. If not, have a good life. Take care.